Well, hello there and welcome to my channel. I am so glad you guys are here because today we get to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is books, sci-fi, and MBTI, all wrapped into one nice little neat bow. I have found a way to connect them all and I'm really excited because today we're going to talk about sci-fi recommendations based on your type. Now, I did have to be limited to only sci-fi that I have read, but thankfully I've read a lot of sci-fi, so I have more than enough to cover each of the 16 types. And so, without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about what sci-fi you should pick up based on your MBTI type. What I'm going to do with each book is explain why I've picked it for your type, because I do believe that these books could work for anyone. Like literally anyone could like these books regardless of your type, but I'm going to try to cater the book to your type and explain a little bit of why I chose it. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's start with INFPs. INFPs tend to love relationships. They tend to love learning and watching relationships. And more than that, they like a story that's gonna hit them in the feels. Now, the two main characters of this story are actually both thinkers. They're an ISTJ and INTP. However, I still think that you would really enjoy this story. It's a little bit slower, but it's very character driven. It's a little bit whimsical. It's a little bit weird, but the characters are phenomenal and the story hits you in the gut. And that is 1Q84 by Haruki Murakami. This story is fantastic, and I think it'll really appeal to your need to have strong relationships and strong, well-developed characters, while also having a world that's kind of sciencey, but the focus isn't really on the world, it's on the characters. So I think that that's going to be a perfect book for INFPs. Then let's go ahead and recommend for ISFPs. ISFPs too really want a book that's all about the relationships, but in this case, I've chosen a book that's about the relationship with themselves. So this book is called The Original. The Original is actually a pretty short book. It's easy to read. It's actually better as an audiobook. I think you might only be able to find it as an audiobook. This will fit the active and engaging life of an ISFP without taking a whole lot of time out of your life, but also having a story about identity, about the identity of the main character forced to go after herself. She is forced to try to find herself. It's crazy. I can't really explain more than that, but I think that if you're an ISFP, you would really enjoy the book called The Original. Then, let's go on to INTPs. INTPs, you want something that's going to appeal to your mind. You want something that's going to make you think a lot. It's something that's going to explore multiple possibilities and also engage you. And the stories don't necessarily have to be as much about the characters so much as the concepts and the ideas, so that you have some kind of mental exercise through your story. And that's why for INTPs, I have chosen The Three-Body Problem. The Three-Body Problem is about a physicist, and I can't really say more than that other than aliens. I'll leave it at that. I think you would really enjoy this as an INTP, even if you aren't super into physics itself. I think that this story would engage you, it would draw you into the world, and it would start making you think about a lot of things. There's a lot of draw from history, and there's a lot of draw from science that I think will really appeal to the INTP. Then let's talk about the ISTP, and finally, I can hold up a book with this one, and that is Altered Carbon. I believe ISTPs would really enjoy Altered Carbon. Now, the reason why I believe they would love Altered Carbon is it is action-packed. Like, there is a lot going on in the story to keep you engaged constantly. It's not a story that takes its time or kicks its heel. There is plenty of drugs, sex, and action. Like, is there anything else an ISTP wants? It's also going to engage your mind. There's a little bit of a mystery. You have to kind of figure out what's going on. So I think it would be really perfect for an ISTP. Then let's go ahead and recommend for the INFJ. Now, an INFJ is going to want a story that has a little bit more depth and nuance in the messages itself. Generally, INFJs really care about what's the meaning behind the story and what am I learning from this story? And that's why for INFJs, I recommend The Parable of the Sower. Now, not only is this one of my favorite books of all time, but I think that this is perfect for an INFJ. First of all, I believe the main character is an INFJ. Not that you need a character to represent your type to enjoy it, But because this story is led by an INFJ character, it is more philosophical by default. The main character is constantly thinking about her philosophy and understanding the way that the world works and trying to make it better. She wants to make the world better, and she lives in a pretty crappy world. Now, forewarning, could be a little depressing, but if you're an INFJ, I really think you would love this story. Then let's talk about ISFJs. Now, ISFJs, you guys really don't necessarily need as much of the meaning behind it, but maybe you want a story that's really going to engage your mind. The book I chose for ISFJs is actually Never Let Me Go, which is another one of my favorite stories. And now the reason that I have chosen this for ISFJs is because it's very focused on the character's memories, and the science is very minimal in this story. It's more of a dystopian than a sci-fi, but at the same time, you're introduced to some philosophical ideas that you can think about and ponder, but also just have a story about a character who's going through a tough time, trying to figure out how to make sense of this world, how to live in this world, and how to make the best out of that. She has a crappy situation, and she does everything she can to make the most out of it, and I think this would most appeal to the ISFJ. Then we're going to talk about the INTJ. Now, INTJs, they're going to be the people who most want the idea to be at the forefront of the story. They're going to want a story that has an idea that they can make use of in the real world. A story in which maybe the characters don't matter that much. Maybe the whole flow of the story doesn't matter as much as the ideas, as the concepts, and something that they can actually apply to their life, which is why I have chosen The Foundation. Not only is Foundation a classic sci-fi, one of the first sci-fi, but the stories and the concepts explored in this are both immediately applicable into the real world, but also just fun and engaging. This is a story that engages your mind more than any of the stories that I'm mentioning, and I think that it's perfect for an INTJ who wants a nice sci-fi, doesn't really worry too much about the characters, and is much more about the concepts. Not to say that INTJs don't like characters, I'm just saying I think that you guys would be the ones most likely to enjoy The Foundation. It's the Foundation trilogy, Foundation. I want to call it The Foundation all the time. It's just Foundation. Then let's recommend for the ISTJ. Now I do. For the ISTJ, I recommend Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. This is a story that is pretty action-packed. Like, there's quite a bit that's happening, but the emphasis is on the world and why the world is the way that it is, and it makes you question what's the right thing to do. And it does this in a way that is subtle and under the surface, and it's not as blatant as something like Parable of the Sower, where the theme is in your face, smacking you all across the face. This one's a little bit more subtle. I think you guys could enjoy a lot of books as ISTJ. I think any of you guys can enjoy a lot of books. But I think that you guys would really appeal to the main character and the struggle that he's going through, and you would think about how you would handle this situation. And I think that's going to be perfect for an ISTJ to insert themselves into the story and try to figure out what they would do if they were in this situation. So that's why I've chose Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. Let's move on to our extroverts. For our extroverts, you guys are going to still want to read stories. I mean, just because you're extroverts doesn't mean that you don't read plenty of stories, or if you don't, you read some stories. The first person that I'm going to recommend books for is actually the ESTJ. Now, I've chosen, rather than a novel, a series of novellas. These novellas are called Murderbot. Murderbot is this character who is socially anxious and doesn't really want to deal with people. But at the same time, he's forced to, and the situations are fun, exciting, but also make you think a little bit. And there's a lot of decision making going on. I think ESTJs like reading about people making decisions, and there is nothing but Murderbot making decisions, this whole story. And I think you will really enjoy these quick reads. You can read them all as a single book, or you can read them individually. But I think this book would really appeal to you guys. The next type that I'm going to recommend for is the ENTJ. Now, the ENTJ is going to want a story that has a strong theme, but it's also about the character making decisions and understanding those decisions and, enjoying vicariously through the character. Now, in this book, A Clockwork Orange, the main character, Alex, is incredibly smart. He's incredibly creative with his decisions and very willful. And I think any ENTJ would be more than happy to read a character like this, but on top of that, there's a strong theme and message throughout the entire story that an ENTJ can pick up on, and they can apply that in their real life. The concept is, at what point do rules and regulations take away human freedom to make those moral decisions themselves? And I feel like there's not a better book that could address a theme that's better suited for an ENTJ. Then let's talk about ENFJ. I feel like an ENFJ is going to want a story about characters in relationships. They're going to want to read about people interacting with each other. They're going to want to feel with the characters as they feel for each other, and they're going to want to get invested in the characters. And on top of feeling for the characters, they're going to want a strong theme and interesting world to carry them through all of that. And that's why for the ENFJ, I have chosen This Is How You Lose the Time War. In This Is How You Lose the Time War, you follow two perspectives of these two time, how do you say? They are people who travel through time and they're trying to stop one another, but the whole while they're kind of falling in love. And I think that it's a perfect story for an ENFJ where you get a little bit of that surrealism, a lot of themes, but also really strong relationships that you can attach yourself to. For ESFJs, again, I feel like they're really going to want a strong relationship to cling on to. Now, the book that I've chosen doesn't have the strongest relationship to cling on to, but it does address societal standards and the standards specifically of religion. And I think this could be a fun story for an ESFJ to explore sci-fi without really having much of the science in there, but to explore these concepts of society and how tradition impacts society, which is why I have chosen A Handmaid's Tale. A Handmaid's Tale is all about one woman as she lives in this world driven by the patriarchy. And it is a very heavy book, but I think an ESFJ would be best suited for this style of story. It is very inside. You get completely drawn into the world, into the character's mind, and you get to experience these different relationships through the frame of the main character. And I think you'd really enjoy that story. Then let's go ahead and talk about a book for an ESTP. Now, every ESTP I have ever met says they don't really like books that cover science and stuff. Like they don't really like superpowers. They don't really love things that are like not realistic. They want things that feel real and visceral. And that is why I have chosen Jurassic Park for ESTPs. Now, Jurassic Park is one of those stories where you're going to feel smarter after reading it. You're going to feel more informed. It's going to feel like it's really happening. Like it's not a huge stretch of the imagination to think that what they're doing in this book is reasonable and believable. The way that Michael Crichton has written it, it doesn't feel like a fantasy. It feels like it could actually be happening. These are real characters in real world, dealing with real world problems. Just so happens that those real world problems include dinosaurs. I think this is a book that could bridge the ESTP into sci-fi without really having to go into a completely different world. Then let's talk about ENTP. Now, ENTPs, you're going to be open to a lot of kinds of books, which is why I could put just about any book for the ENTP. However, I've chosen a specific author for the ENTP, and I'm showing you guys this book, Recursion. However, I think this book or Dark Matter would work really well for an ENTP. And now the reason why, the themes explored are done in such a way as the story is exciting, the story is fun, the ideas are crazy. You really have to stretch your imagination and suspend your disbelief in order to accept the weirdness that's going on in the story. And I feel like if anyone can suspend their disbelief long enough for a story like that, it's an ENTP. I think you guys will really like either one of the stories, though I would actually personally recommend Dark Matter more for you as an ENTP because it deals with the concepts of things like multiverse and wanting to fix mistakes of your past, which I think an ENTP could relate to and would want to see how that could play out. Then for ENFPs, I'm a little biased because I'm an ENFP. I like all of these books. All of these books could work for me. All of these books could work for you. But the book that I've chosen specifically for ENFP is Red Rising. ENFPs love books that hit us in the soul. Like, we want to feel something, but we also want to expand our horizons and see what things could be like and be in a weird world. Well, this is a weird world heavily driven by society and class systems. And I think an ENFP is going to really, really love delving into this world, suspending their disbelief for long enough to explore what it would mean to be a red and what it would mean to be in this world. And I highly recommend Red Rising for any ENFP out there. Any of you guys actually I would definitely recommend Red Rising, but especially for ENFPs. And then finally, I want to recommend a book for ESFPs. Now, ESFPs, like ESTPs, are going to want something a little bit more grounded in reality, something where they don't really have to suspend their disbelief quite as much. But I feel like ESFPs are there for the fun of the ride, and that's going to be the majority of this story. Now, I have chosen an absolutely remarkable thing for ESFPs. The story takes place in the modern world. It takes place in a reality you and I both know more than anything. It has a main character who's willful, very strong and opinionated, and she has to deal with this weird situation that she's been put in. And this situation is, yeah, it's weird, but it's believable. Like, you could see it happening, these aliens coming to humanity and how you might have to deal with it. It deals with themes of social media and being in the public eye, which I think is something ESFPs could really enjoy seeing how that would play out. It's gonna make you stretch your imagination a little bit, but for the most part, I think it's gonna be really grounded in reality and help you explore the themes of sci-fi without really having to go full crazy sci-fi. But guys, that's my list. Those are my recommendations of sci-fi for you based on your type. I've tried to validate every single reason why I chose those books, but at the end of the day, all of these books are fantastic. I wouldn't have recommended them if they weren't. Now, the only book on this list that I don't love is Altered Carbon, and I just think that's because I'm not the target demographic. I think it's made for other people, not me, but it's really got some interesting themes, ideas, and the plot is fantastic. With all that being said, what books would you recommend? Have you read any of these books? Do you think I mixed up which type should receive which book? Let me know all that information down in the comments. If you want to check out any of these books, I have put the link down in the description so that you can get yourself a copy of one of these books. Or I would highly recommend downloading the Libby app and using your local library card to borrow things for free, because that's a fantastic tool to have in 2021 when you don't want to leave your house and you don't want to spend money. But with all that, thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you have a beautiful, amazing, fantastic day. Bye-bye!